Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming today. The question that we're attempting to answer in this stream is, how is the UK championing innovation in connecting digital twins? And at Energy Systems Catapult, our mission is to unleash innovation and open new markets to capture the clean growth economy. Understanding where connected digital twins can help us in that mission, what the key questions that can be answered with those tools, and how we can continually innovate to improve our capability and get to that end state faster are important questions for us to answer. So this project, the Energy System Digital Twin Visual Demonstrator, it aimed to investigate this, highlight issues and opportunities, and build a network of innovators who want to work collaboratively to build that capability. So I'll tell you a bit about the history. So last year, we were approached by the BEIS modelling team, they were BEIS back then, to investigate the use of digital twins to improve the outcomes from specific modelling scenarios and improve the impact that those outputs had on decision makers, policy makers, ministers, minister staff. So that led to the first version of our Energy System Digital Twin Visual Demonstrator. And then this year, as part of Innovate UK's Cyber Physical Infrastructure project, which Simon Hart spoke about earlier today, we have taken steps to improve the demonstrator, and I'll be telling you about both of those projects today. Oh, that's me. And I should mention that this project was in collaboration with Fraser Nash Consultancy and Cityscape Digital. And they're both in the room today, and they will be taking questions at the end of this presentation. So I'm going to be talking for about 15, 20 minutes, and then we should have about 15 minutes for questions. So please do think up questions while I'm talking. OK, so let's set the scene. Make it clear what the purpose of this digital twin demonstrator is. So to decarbonise the energy system by the year 2050, it is crucial that decision makers are equipped with the insights they need to ensure that decisions are effective and influential. With increasing assets under the control and monitoring of digital systems, digital twin solutions are being realised as solutions able to digest, model, and represent the increased valuable data streams being created. So this digital twin demonstrator investigates the use case of decarbonising homes by attempting to understand uncertainty and presenting results in an easy to understand and visually appealing way. Okay. So what do we mean by digital twin? And I am going to take time to explain what we mean by digital twin. There are a number of definitions and varying opinions, but for clarity, this is how Energy Systems Catapult views the answer to that question. So a digital twin is a system which is able to incorporate a two-way flow of information between a digital model and a physical object or system, where making a change to one can affect the other. This flow doesn't necessarily have to be real time. What is important is right time. So what we have developed so far on this project is actually a digital shadow. So it takes data regarding the physical assets, which in this situation is building energy usage from the national buildings model, and feeds that data into a digital representation of the UK's energy system, from where we can change technology levers to predict a journey towards net zero. In effect, this is a digital shadow, and the reason for that is because the flow of information is only in one direction. It's worth pointing out at this point as well that this is a demonstrator. It's not a prototype. It's not a pilot version. And what I mean by that is that the data used is real data from the National Buildings Model, and the data processing has been done to present realistic outcomes, but they are not validated, and they should not be used for decision making. This project is more about sharing what can be done with digital twins. So, to support the transition to net zero, the digital twin aims to support the use case of domestic decarbonisation. And as most of you will know, often information is siloed between different organisations and people based on what those people are currently working on. Generating a full picture of what is happening within the wider system is difficult. Chances are effort is being duplicated and messages are misunderstood. The original brief from Bayes was to find a solution to this problem, aligning models and information sources in a way that provides outputs, giving holistic insight for all manner of user, both non-technical and technical. And the use case focused on domestic decarbonisation, as I said, and the ability to move both geospatially and temporally to explore the effect of policy measures throughout the UK. Cost was consciously removed from the twin, so you won't see any pounds in this demonstrator. And the focus is on the potential of various technologies to deliver net zero. So we instead looked at varying the intensity of deployment of solar panels, wall insulation, heat pumps, and electric vehicle chargers into homes. Okay, so before reviewing the improvements, let's take a look at the demonstrator, which we generated in the previous project. So the user can choose from a number of policy levers to generate the prediction of when net zero will be achieved by varying the intensity of the technology uptake. And then the slider at the bottom of the screen can be moved to show the progression through time from now until net zero, although it's now until it went from net zero to now in that example. So by clicking on the Technologies tab, the user can see more numeric data, and by enlarging and zooming in on the map, you can then see data for more specific regions. You can choose which data you're seeing by clicking on the metrics on the side, on the left-hand side. There's also a regional view for even more granular data. So in this example, we're focusing on Manchester. And there's a local view, which shows how a typical street will change over time as new technologies are adopted. So you can notice that the solar panels on the roofs, the external insulation on the walls, heat pumps appearing outside the houses, and electric vehicle chargers in the driveways. And then if you click on a specific house, you can see the data that's associated with it. Then if you click on the technologies, it highlights that particular technology in the view. And then, as with the other views, if you move the timeline slider, it shows the changes through time. Okay, so that was version 1, which we did last year. So how did we arrive at the goals for version 2 of the demonstrator? So let's look at some common challenges that we see in digital twins today. So this slide shows a typical setup for a digital twin. On the left-hand side, you've got reality, and data from this side feeds into the digital twin, which then chooses to expose some of that data to the user on the right-hand side, who is looking to understand the data presented to them to make a decision, design something, or achieve an outcome. At each stage on this diagram, there were certain issues that we wanted to explore in more detail. So looking at reality, sometimes when modelling, reality can be oversimplified. The real world is messy, it's complex, it's uncertain, and data is often missing. The digital twin itself can sometimes be opaque and doesn't necessarily allow the user to see the complexity that has come from the real world. And the users themselves often report out to many stakeholders who may be interested in comparing different options and would like to understand how confident we are in the output. And finally, how can that output be visualized? What will it really look like? So we took some of these challenges and we turned them into goals for the improvement of the digital twin demonstrator. And we had 4 main goals, and they are deliberately not in order on this slide. So the first goal on the left-hand side is looking at the issue of missing data, uncertainty in the real world, and how that's exposed to the user of the digital twin. Can we demonstrate the level of confidence we have in the answer and use that uncertainty to our advantage? Right on the other side of the slide is goal 2. Once that data has fed through the digital twin, can the user easily compare different options and convince their stakeholders they've arrived at the best decision? Goal 3, coming back through the digital twin, can the user see the information and in the twin itself and trace back the logic of the output that they're seeing? And finally, goal 4, can we visualize the reality of that outcome? So how did we achieve these goals? So this slide shows the setup of the demonstrator for the first version. The version in the video that you just saw. So the national buildings model was fed into middleware, which created the predictions, and that in turn was passed into the visual demonstrator to visualize the outcomes. The update to the demonstrator exposes the real-world uncertainty in the data set, and the middleware has been replaced with a probabilistic graphical model. It's graphical because it's made up of a number of nodes connected by edges, and it's probabilistic because each one of those nodes contains uncertainty. This allows us to calculate the output and assign a level of confidence to that output. So here's the fun bit. We're going to watch another video. So this is the new version of the digital twin demonstrator. So we now have the ability to compare different combinations of policy levers, policy 1 and policy 2. It's the same click buttons as before, but you can have two versions, essentially. And that change has driven the evolution of the design changes within the visualization. So we're now able to compare the carbon emissions, the reduction in emissions by 2050, and the makeup of the impact of those 3 policy areas between policy 1 and policy 2. Those are the graphs at the top. Within the main view, there's now functionality which allows the user to compare the output from the 2 policy choices by moving the curtain. And the user is also able to filter the results using confidence versus impact in order to focus in on the data interrogation. We have a new progress chart. And this chart allows us to map carbon reductions for each local authority. And again, you can compare between policy 1 and policy 2. And zoom in to look at each local authority in more detail, looking at each local authority's data and the progress that it's making. The outcome logic map illustrates the distribution of contribution to the overall carbon emissions calculated for each scenario. This is a summarized representation of the Bayesian calculation, which allows the user to trace back the logic of the outcome to make sense of the results. See, there's lots of nodes. And again, you can do a direct comparison between policy 1 and policy 2. Again, it's all connected to the timeline slider at the bottom, so we are able to visualize how the contributions change over time. And moving on to another major change to the demonstrator, It's a complete rework of the local view. So you'll see this is very different to what you saw before in the first video. So by putting ourselves in the shoes of the target user, a policymaker, the main aim here is to communicate the practical reality of proposed policy changes in each area. And that presented us with multiple challenges which have driven the change here. On the one hand, there's a drive for realism in order to answer the question, so, okay, the data makes sense, but what does this look like on my street, on my house? But on the other hand, our previous approach, which was more stylized and it was geo-specific representation, it potentially opens up questions that are difficult to answer. So, for example, if the model tells us that by 2040, 60% of houses will be insulated, which 60%? Why is my neighbour's house getting insulation but mine isn't? And we're also aware of GDPR restrictions and around personal identifiable information and the issue of scalability. So what we've done here is we've taken a step back and changed direction. Instead of representing reality, we've created non-geo-specific area characterizations. We currently have an urban warehouse conversion setting, which was the previous setting that you saw, and this is the mid-century suburban setting. The functionality is the same as before, with various technologies appearing as you slide through time, but it's a much more realistic representation without being geospatially specific. Okay, so in summary, as you've seen, we've improved the data set by using a Bayesian network to generate uncertainty data, which has new accompanying visualizations. We've added an option to compare two different policy choices, and the user can now view and trace back through the logic to understand their output. We've updated the local view visualization to make the impact of policy choices more realistic. So digital twins have the potential to help policymakers make confident decisions in a complex and uncertain scenario by quantifying that uncertainty, visualizing multiple options, and allowing them to trace back the output to the input data. And by connecting these digital twins, we can support a system-wide approach to problem solving to make our progress more efficient and more effective. Right, so I'd now like to welcome my colleagues on this project to the stage to help me answer some questions. So Andy Moore from Fraser Nash Consultancy, who led on the uncertainty modelling, up you come, and David Munro from Cityscape Digital, who led on the visualisation. Thank you. We're keen to share our learnings and understand where these might help you in your digital twin journey. So please feel free to ask any questions about either of the demonstrators or your thoughts on what we could be doing next. I'm going to check Slido.
There's at least one.
So there's no questions on Slido yet, but we've got some questions in the room. So is the lectern mic working?
Yeah.
Okay, so should we use the handheld mic for the floor,
Yeah.
and then we'll answer the questions at the lectern?
It's not relaxed too much.
Yeah. Addition, yeah.
Hi there, Dan at BSI. One of the things I wondered, a lot of the simulation stuff you showed there seemed to be fairly modern kind of domestic properties. I say modern, as a Welshman, as you might be able to tell by my twang, we have quite old solid wall houses that are probably the worst, least efficient. And I just thought it was interesting that the model on the demonstrator seemed to not focus on what were probably the least performing houses. And, you know, having looked at this in the past sometimes, you need so much insulation that actually the roof overhang isn't sufficient, and it means then you actually need to do roof adaptations and those other things to it as well. So I'm just wondering, is there a reason in particular why the worst performing houses aren't the sort of ones that you've put on there? And is it because of those sorts of problems?
Okay, that's a great question, thank you. No, we didn't do that on purpose. If I ask David to answer, so why did we specifically choose the urban warehouse setting and the mid-century suburban setting to do the visualisations?
Yes, so I guess these are more examples, they're more just taking examples of typical streets. So I don't know how much thinking went behind which specific types we chose. I think it was more of a generalisation of just to show there is a difference. And I think when we do dig deeper into how these technologies are rolled out, we'll need to start digging deeper into the tenures of the properties, who manages them. Is it the local authority? Are they privately owned? There's a lot more data that needs to be drawn on, which is, some of that is in the model at the moment, and some of it is being taken into account, but only to a certain degree. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of complexity in there, and it was just a way of simplifying it for this demonstrator.
Yeah. I think the regional view, which was only flashed up very briefly, is probably would be probably more useful if you were trying to answer a question from a local authority perspective. If you wanted to focus in on Wales or a specific city or town in Wales, you could do that in the regional view and see, oh, well, this area is going to take ages to get to net zero, and I wonder why that is. Perhaps it's the housing type compared to another region or another city elsewhere in the UK. So the regional view would help you with that, and the national view, where it's broken up into larger regions, you might get some insight from that as well. But we could create any number of local view visualizations, but there was no specific reason why we didn't pick solid brick houses.
One of the ways we talked about possibly extending it as well is to do that full categorisation of the, where are the biggest wins to be had from doing this stuff, and what are the different population densities around different housing types around the UK. And I'd love to see that in a future version of this, to actually do the full categorisation and see it. I guess, yeah, echoing back what you say, probably a timing thing of this particular project to get those in.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your question. Go on, Chris.
Chris Dent, University of Edinburgh, and the Credo project. Could you say a little bit about how you see the route to deployment of the BaseNet approach, and the specific context there, which my colleagues have seen in Credo and other projects, and we've talked about a bit before, is that we're dealing with very practically important, practically useful methods, but where the experience of them tends to be confined to quite a small specialist community. Whereas the real business is in a sense, if we have a very wide range of organisations able to use this, or even people being able to use it broadly within a single client organisation. Yeah, I'd be grateful for any comment you have on how you see that.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Yeah, shall I say that one then? So. I guess in terms of applying the BaseNet type technique to some of these models in the future, what I'd love to see is, you saw on the demonstrator, we did forecasting with that model. So we took what data was available, we looked, there were gaps in that data set, so we had to do some predictions to try and map those gaps and capture that as an uncertainty distribution. I thought would be really powerful for this though, is that you can make some decisions using that model and that process, run them in real life, and I guess it comes back to that point of the digital twin, actually linking up to reality and feeding more data in, is you can start to measure and evaluate how good that policy is. So if you look at policy cycles and things, at the end of the ROMEF cycle, you look at how do you measure the impact of that policy, evaluate that, and then iterate and go again. I see the BaseNet approach being really good for that, because it's saying, here's what we expect the outcome to be. There's this uncertainty around it. Let's gather some data, and that will feed back into our distributions of uncertainty and allow us to get a better prediction of what's going to happen next, and maybe even change our mind in terms of what the best output option might be. Is that kind of where you were getting at with the question, Chris, or was it a different angle?
Slightly different aspect.
Yeah.
It was not so much, it was partly about where you're looking at heading in future technical developments, but also about how you see this being deployed in the field, because that's probably going to mean people using it who aren't the technical specialists in these methods at Fraser-Nash. It'll be probably a wider range of people in whatever organisations. And how do you see the combination perhaps of some upskilling, but also how this is presented as tools or protocols in a way that people out there in the world can do all these great things?
Yeah, really, really interesting question, and quite a complex, like, big topic area as well. I think it's sort of, in my mind, the things that come to mind links to some of the conversations before actually as well, about trust in models. And that's what we hope to do a little bit with this work, is to try and say, okay, take you know, a reasonably complex system like decarbonisation or something. It could be things like Credo, like I'm sure like that you're working on, Chris. And often there's a sense that some of these digital twins being created in all different manners of use cases can sometimes start off being a bit black box, and people from an outside world might be trying to interact with some of these models and try and, you know, do they trust them? Do they really understand that the outcome is something that they can believe? Which is quite an interesting topic I'd like to get more under the hood of. My hope is with a method like this, it's a graphical approach. So it firstly gives you that image of what constituent components of the model, how is it formed, what are the important factors, where the data exists right now to inform it, and then tries to explain a bit more around what the solution is. There's a whole other aspect to that question as well, I think, in terms of that's all well and good. How do you know, take a layman's approach to can we answer this policy question with no understanding of data science or modelling or anything else, which is a huge, in my mind, upskilling task across industry. It's about focusing the right people, the right efforts. It's going to be years, if not decades, of upskilling and everything else that's needed for topics like this and lots of other aspects of society as well.
Thanks for your questions, Chris. Any other questions in the room? Oh, we've got lots actually. And we've got some on Slido as well, but let's take the questions in the room.
Asif Aziz from Cadent. I noticed that with the model there was a lot of reference to heat pumps, but no kind of consideration of, I guess, hydrogen. And I guess looking at domestic stock, obviously from a Cadent perspective, we're advocating for the promotion and use of hydrogen, particularly, I guess, what we're seeing the initial use case will be around the industrial sector. So will that be considered? Obviously, there's some big policy decisions to come in the next couple of years around hydrogen, but has that been thought about in terms of how that can be considered for the scenarios?
Yes, great question. Thanks for that. Yeah, so we did start to consider at the start of this. It was a visual demonstrator project, so we were trying to think, how do we get the most bang for buck in terms of, it's a short time scale here, we need to create something that develops something new and innovative, but, you know, has some technologies in there. What we did try to do is build it in such a way that we could add other nodes to that network in the future. So you probably couldn't see online all of the different nodes and what the technologies were in there. Yeah, I'd love to see some of these new innovation projects in terms of hydrogen. We're actually working on one at the moment about hydrogen batteries, where you can locate hydrogen batteries as storage systems and things like that. Lots and lots of other energy technologies on the grid that are important to model as well. So hopefully, if this is done successfully, we can create a system where you can add in extra nodes for new technologies and explore what impact that might have on your policy in the future. But yeah, as sort of alluded to, at the moment, we try to focus on what are the maybe currently well-proven existing technologies that are more well-used throughout society right now. Definitely agree. Next step is to look at what's over the horizon, what's coming up in the next few years that's going to maybe change some of those decisions, and you can do maybe a robustness check against your policy outcomes, against those new future technologies as well.
And from a visualization point of view, it's a lot easier to visualize a heat pump appearing in somebody's garden than it is hydrogen flowing through their pipe to their boiler. I'm not quite sure how you would visualize that. So that was also a consideration. But you've hit on a really interesting point, actually, because the base data that we use from the National Buildings Model gives you energy usage per property archetype. but it's not split out between electricity and gas or electricity and what other fuel you might be using to heat your home. So we had to make some assumptions on what that split was now and how that split would change in the future based on the policy levers, the technology levers that we'd put into the demonstrator. It's probably quite a poor assumption. That's probably the weakest part of the data prediction, to be honest. So yeah, it would definitely be something that would be interesting exploring and improving in the next iteration of this.
Yeah, and it's probably worth saying that the idea was to build out this tool or to start to build it out that so that it gives policymakers the kind of the confidence to make the decisions they need to make, and we're fully aware that the complexity isn't in the model at the moment that needs to be there, but the systems are, and they're the building blocks that we can add to, and then it's got, I think, enough transparency in there, which again needs to be built on to give that confidence. And so part of that is illustrating where we're not confident and where there is missing information and where we've made assumptions. So, and there's always going to be like that. So there's always a kind of a fight between keeping the complexity but showing it in an easy to understand way.
Yeah. I'll just take one question from Slido because it follows on quite nicely actually from that one, which is, would having a more detailed model for the second and future versions require more computational power, data management to run the digital twin, especially if you're considering modelling towns or cities to make decisions in the future? So can you talk a little bit about the steps you had to make to manage the amount of data that there was, and what compromises we had to make to deal with that?
Yeah, another great question. Yeah, So yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? So there was some work that we had to do initially to just look at what data sources are there out there available that can help inform the distributions that go into the Bayesian network. We actually did some calculations offline from the live interactive model that you can see in order to form some of those distributions. So what will be interesting is, as we start to build and extend on that, is how viable it is to keep on doing those pre-processing calculations to inform the distributions at a slower time scale than the live interaction that you might get to see. I'm hopeful that process will be quite useful for quite a while, but you can imagine as it gets more and more complex, it's something to start to think a little bit harder about and wonder whether we need to do something different there. But I guess from our point of view, once you've got your model and your it's the distribution that's programmed into the model. Distribution and mathematical logic that helps you to, play some tunes on different levers here and understand the outcomes. So I'll be quite hopeful that actually you can solve the equations in that Bayesian network, provided you don't start to double the size of the network or quadruple the size of the network in a similar sort of time scale, because it's just using some of those pre-processed distributions.
Do you have any comments on the visualization aspect and how we managed to get it snappy and actually reacting to the user's click?
Yeah, sure. I think we were actually surprised at how fast it was in the end. We were expecting it to take, it's going to take minutes or hours, or maybe I'm exaggerating slightly, but I think it was actually fast enough that we were able to, with the data set we had, which was quite large, the computations didn't take as long, and I think that's where we were expecting the waiting time to be. So maybe that's kind of maybe one more for you there, but it is interesting that it kind of goes back to the how real time is the data idea, and how real time does it need to be? How many decision makers are going to be using this tool? How often? Is it something that actually it's fine to wait 5 minutes? We're going to do some simulations, or is it something for the public to help with public engagement, for instance, and they'll want it like that. So, but then maybe there's a different level of information that needs to be used and data there. So,
yeah, like I say, it's an interesting topic, isn't it? That was that slide before that you put up, Eloise, on what is a digital twin, is it right time data, and to me it's one of the different use cases than like a gas turbine digital twin where you need to make an operational decision right now. This is a policy digital twin in my mind. So the decision is from a policymaker, it takes a lot of time to then implement that policy. And you're talking about looking at the ROMEF cycle type of timescales here. So you need to go and then measure and evaluate how good that policy's been, input the data from your measurements back into the digital twin, which is definitely not, real time, make a decision, understand the outcome. It's right time because it's make a decision, implement that in reality, and then measure it as the measurements come back in and update that. So it's definitely slower timescales than people might traditionally think of with an operational gas turbine style digital twin or an Industry 4.0 one.
Or even Google Maps.
Or even, yeah.
And there was another question over here.
Hello, Brian Matthews, Daphne, the Daphne project. I wondered if you thought about how you would connect your model to other models. Particularly, I was thinking of there's a big policy implication between this sort of modelling you're doing and urban development land use models and how they change with demographics, how they change with economics over time. And there are good models around doing that kind of thing. So have you thought about how you would combine those together at all to kind of have a more rich policy feedback that you're talking about, how you make that richer?
Great question. Again, this is one of those, actually, interestingly, we hadn't thought too hard about it, but in today's hearing about some of the other digital twins out there, what strikes me is some of the distributional effects that you see across the country with these policy decisions. So you can see in the national view that we showed, there were some quite significant differences. I mean, what you probably couldn't see because it was just a colour scale, but there were some quite significant differences in different regions of the country. And what would be great is to extend what we were looking at, which I think plotted up there on the video was just carbon emissions, or possibly a similar metric to that, electricity usage and gas usage, things like that. So what does that actually mean then in terms of, like you say, land usage, in terms of different estates and how their emissions change?
If the local planning had a lot of high density housing as opposed to a lot of low density housing, so in 20 years' time the housing profile is very different than it is now, so we could have a very different policy outcome for the energy.
Exactly, we might need to go into much more detail with some of the modelling aspects, and perhaps I can see a world where this is perhaps bring some of the more detailed modelling at a local level up into something like this, which allows you to explore a different scale, basically. It'd be really fascinating to try and understand that a bit better as to, if this gets extended as we want it to, how we can integrate some of those aspects in different models. Yeah, thank you.
Another question from on Slido was, great work, thanks Anonymous. Can we trial this application and would you be able to share the technology stack? So I guess from energy system Catapult point of view and from the funding point of view, this is funded by Innovate UK, which is all about collaboration and helping SMEs progress and bring their technology to market. So we'd definitely be open to discussing that. And I believe both Citygate Digital and Fraser Nash Consultancy are also open to collaborating on this project with others in the future. So do you want to...
And that's where the value comes from when it's actually used. So,
yeah.
Of course.
Yeah, that's a much better answer, actually. Of course. Thank you, David.
And actually, something you said just at the beginning there that great work. And actually, it's worth saying. I don't know if it's normally said in these kind of situations, but it has been really good working with Energy Systems Catapult, and very, very easy, very well managed, and Fraser Nash, of course. And yeah, it's seamless, felt seamless.
Thank you. Likewise. We just pat each other on the back as well. We stand at the front here. Right, so I think we've got time for one more question. Is there anything anyone wants to ask from the room? So I'll go online. So how much work have you done looking at the archetypes of housing to understand how the policies affect different areas best?
There is a certain amount of data that comes from the National Building Model. It is limited though, and that's something that I think we noticed, and I think to really, I mean, there's a lot of data there. So I think if we start talking to local authorities and maybe do some trials with maybe a range of local authorities, we can start to see how. I think I mentioned before that the tenure of the building and how it's managed, and where are the easy, where's the low-hanging fruit? Where is the adoption going to be earliest? You can really start to get into that, which yeah, there is a bit of data there. I don't think it's integrated enough in the decision making, as far as I know. But that's just one layer of complexity that I think is probably a really important one. So that's a really good question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Right, well, we're out of time, I think, aren't we, Jonathan? So thanks for the engagement from the room and online. Thank you for your questions. That's it.
Thank you very much.